All right. Hey there, and welcome to this episode where we're going to talk about how to help a loved one with OCD and anxiety. And so in this specific episode, in this series that's going to follow, this is the first episode in this series, I want to talk to the people. This really is made for people who have a loved one, or whether it's a significant other, a child, a family member, a friend that's struggling with OCD and anxiety. And the reason I wanted to make this is because for most people, right, by the time symptoms onset in their life and the time they get help, there's usually a huge gap there where things radically progress and really significantly impact your life. And with things like OCD, it's reported that in I think on the average time is like 7 years before when symptoms arise and the person gets help, right? And obviously a lot of damage is done in those 7 years when we're feeding the disorder and it's growing. A lot of impact on the relationships, impacts at work, and all other areas of their life, right? And so the hope is that because you are the family members, right, and you're the loved ones of these individuals, we need to understand that OCD and anxiety is a family problem, right? It is going to be, it's going to be something that's going to impact everyone. Yes, the person who's suffering is obviously suffering, but that doesn't mean that you aren't either, right? Because there's oftentimes going to be a lot of changes and accommodations that's going on just for the person who's struggling. So as the family, you're often like the first person to notice when things are happening, right? When something might be off. And my hope is that in this series, we can start, equipping, you to, hopefully get the intervention and the right treatment in place a lot sooner than what normally happens, right? And so, as with anything, the first thing that we need to do before we, when it comes to any problem, is recognize that there is a problem, right? So in this episode, what I want to talk about are kind of 8 things we can look at that might signify that an anxiety disorder or OCD is currently present in that person's life, in a loved one's life. And because they won't ever tell you that they have OCD or an anxiety disorder. They might tell you that they feel anxious and things like that, but that doesn't mean they necessarily even know what's going on, right? Because the first step in any kind of change is becoming problem aware. And you might know that there's something going on, but maybe can't pinpoint what it is. And in this series, my hope is that we can equip you with some kind of just kind of basic guidelines to help you identify if this is or is not going on in your loved one's life. So let's go ahead and dive in. So the first thing that we want to look for are large blocks of time being spent alone by the individual. Okay. So if let's say your significant other or child is just in their room for like 3-4 hours and there's nothing really going on in there, or they're washing or in the shower for an extended periods of time, especially on repetitive, like in a repetitive way, like day after day after day after day, right? That's a red flag, right? Because especially if you don't there's no homework being done or anything like that. It's just these large chunks of time. And again, that's not their normal routine. That's something to look for, right? Isolating themselves. That's definitely a red flag that we want to look for. A second thing are abnormal avoidance behaviors. So, and this again is going to be subjective, and obviously based on each situation is going to be different. But when it comes to anxiety disorders and OCD, one of the things that the person is going to do is they're going to want to avoid things that trigger them, right? And as a loved one, you might think you're helping them by helping, because again, it's going to reduce their distress today. But what we need to understand is avoidance behaviors reinforce the fear, and while it might reduce their stress today, it's going to make them worse in the long term. And so, like with any treatment, the goal of this treatment is long-term health and success, not short-term comfort. And so if you find that, the person is starting to avoid things that normally they haven't avoided, in the past. So for instance, let's say with like contamination OCD, if they start avoiding going to restaurants, and every time you want to go out to eat to a restaurant, they're like, oh, no, I don't feel good, or this, and they go without me, and there's this repetitive avoidance of something that they haven't avoided in the past, or something that's just kind of like not usual. That's something to look for, right? That could be what's going on. They could be, very fear and anxiety based driven behaviors. The other thing is just repetitive behaviors in general, right? So the idea of, sitting there and washing again and again and again, right? Watching, the same shows and same movies again and again. I mean, checking locks, right? All sorts of things, right? But just anything very repetitive that you see the person doing again and again, and it's not their normal routine, something that you want to look for. Reassurance seeking. One of the things that happens with people with OCD and anxiety is they use their loved ones to get reassurance. Reassurance makes them feel better about whatever feared topic it is. So they might ask you the same questions, on a repetitive basis. That's something to look for, because the thing is it's going to be in your instinct to want to answer those questions and to relieve their distress, to relieve the anxiety. In fact, it might make you feel good to make them feel good, right? To be, that useful tool to help them get that relief they're looking for. But what we need to understand is that reassurance is, essentially is like their drug, right? They're looking for that reassurance to relieve that anxiety. And then, as you're going to see, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And they're going to need more and more and more of it as that fear pattern grows. And then, also, one of the things that we want to look for are extreme reactions in our loved ones, right? Very emotional reactions. So this can be something as simple as like, look, if you touch something that, and I know I'm using contamination a lot, but I mean, it might be something where if you touch something, then put something out of order that they put in place, and there's this screaming going on or yelling or fighting. That extreme reaction is oftentimes driven by fear, right, and anxiety, and that's what's causing that extreme reaction. So something to pay attention to, all right, are extreme explosive reactions. And if you're noticing that could obviously be a sign that the person might be dealing with an anxiety disorder or OCD. Not always, not in every case, but it's just, again, these are things that we want to look for, little red flags. And then increased irritability. One of the things that happens when you're stressed out all the time, and anxiety disorder is a stress-based disorder, right? You're using a lot of energy, right? And in your body's essentially depleted of energy in many cases. So you're often very exhausted. And that exhaustion leads, to a low threshold of what you're able to handle. And this might just be like normal day-to-day life. So you might ask, a loved one to just like, hey, can you swing by the store and get milk, right? And they might have this like complete attitude about it, or just an irritability about just the smallest things. And it's really easy to take that personally as a loved one, right? It's really easy. Recognizing that this could actually be a symptom, that irritability could be a symptom of kind of an ongoing stress that the person's experiencing. And it's not that it's not giving it permission, but again, it's just recognizing the symptom, right? And then finally, things like depression, right? One of the big problems with anxiety and stress disorders and OCD, right, is that depression is often a secondary symptom. Usually we can notice when someone's depressed. They'll be sleeping all the time, no appetite, they'll just be very lethargic, very down. If we think that that's the problem, though, and we seek treatment for depression, we're obviously not solving the issue, because it's usually a secondary symptom of an anxiety and OCD related disorder. Now again, this is just in the context of OCD and stress, right, and anxiety. Sometimes, obviously depression exists just by itself, but depression will show up as a secondary symptom. So again, really getting in tune with why the person's depressed, and what's going on in their life. And because again, these are things that you're going to notice. And then finally, diet and sleep changes. So with anxiety disorders in general, usually there's a suppression of appetite. So the person may like skip meals or just not eat as much, and they might start to lose weight, right? Kind of unexplainably. And realizing if that's going on, right, that's their appetite's being suppressed from the chronic stress. And then also sleep changes. Stress messes with sleep cycles, right? And then if you don't sleep, you get more stress, and it messes with sleep cycles. So staying up really late, sleeping in, really long, right? Maybe not sleeping as much, just bags under your eyes, things like that. Sleep problems, real big indicator of stress and anxiety as well. So, just to kind of recap these, right? So we have large chunks of time alone or isolation, avoidance behaviors, repetitive behaviors, reassurance seeking, extreme reactions and emotions, increased irritability, depression, and then finally diet and sleep changes. And so with these, I mean, if you start noticing these are the things that you're going to see as the family member, right? Again, like I said, the person's probably not going to come to you and tell you that they have an anxiety disorder. You're just going to start to see these things emerge. And if you do, that's obviously the first step. We want to recognize what they are, because it's easy to see each of these things and point it out as just that thing, right? Oh, he's not sleeping well. Well, why is he not sleeping well? Let's take it one step further as their loved one and kind of go into that for a second. And again, just talking to the person in a very gentle way about these things that might be going on to help you understand what's driving them. And then again, if you are noticing that stress and anxiety is kind of a common thread with these things, well, then guiding that person to help, the right kind of help is always important. So hopefully this was helpful in this episode. And if you're looking for additional resources, down in the notes, we have links over to our site at restoredminds.com, where we have some free downloads and additional resources that can help you on this journey, to really making sure to help your loved ones get better. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and I hope you guys have a wonderful week. I'll see you soon.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you found it helpful, chances are someone else will too, and we'd really appreciate your support by liking and subscribing, and also sharing this video on your social platforms. Also, if you're looking for additional help, we have some resources right down in the links below to help you on your journey. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I hope to see you soon.